Anyone here yet? Fuck. I have no idea what went wrong or when it went wrong. So, damn it. I didn't get any weird message here. Another hour and a half, 378. If everyone is still interested, let me get this off the screen. I have no idea what happened, but I was probably yapping away for a good 15 minutes without noticing, or maybe longer. And I even have the iPad here, which I wasn't fucking paying attention to. Is the last thing I said really about 120 volts with a Princeton? If you have 120 to 122 volts into a Princeton, everything's fine. Good Lord, that was a long time ago. And I didn't get any drop frame messages. Let me make sure that this thing is showing me such things. That's what she said, Thomas. I'm really sorry, everyone. I've been doing this with this setup now for a couple of months, and we've been doing 3-hour streams without any drop frames whatsoever. And usually I don't even have the iPad monitoring it. Of course, this time I didn't even look at it, and I haven't had any issues. Let me see. Well, that was a long-ass time ago. I was talking about the Princeton. Yeah, if you got a Princeton and the wall voltage is between 120 and 122, you don't have to worry about it. Damn. It's so discouraging when this crap happens. I don't see any signs of a drop frame at all. Well, I'm glad everyone was enjoying talking to each other, and I'm just here yapping away to no one, so that's great. Well, someone give me a new question, because I've talked myself ragged about all kinds of things. I was answering all kinds of questions. I was popping things on the screen. Everything was great. Why didn't it give me a notification of a drop? Hey, Vanguard, it would be to me, but I don't have any for sale right now. It's going to be a while before I get ready to announce that. Just had some issues. It was supply stuff. I appreciate that thought, but I'm not ready to go production on that. All right. See, I thought I showed you guys this already. In fact, I did. I even did an intermission and everything. I was continuing to pop questions up because I was so far behind. It's a Champ 12 with a bad reverb pot. That's what the owner knows about. It's got some other things I'll show you later. There'll be an upcoming video on that. Let's see. Well, which older Fender circuit does the newer 68 Custom Pro reverb remind you of? It's almost just the reverb channel from a Vibrolux reverb. As far as the wattage and output transformer goes, it's closer to a Vibrolux than to a Pro. I would say that it is the vibrato channel only of a Vibrolux reverb, but the vibrato tremolo circuit in it is a cathode biased. Not a cathode bias, but a bias wiggle. So it's like the having a Vibrolux reverb, just the reverb channel with the Princeton vibrato tremolo. See, Alan, that's a tricky one. If you're going to buy a production amp today, what would you spend on? It depends on what you want to sound like. The guy who's playing metal is not going to want the same amp as the guy who plays jazz. So if you can give me specific sounds and genres, I can give you a more specific answer. But I don't want to just blather, especially since I answered all these questions that no one heard. I'm glad that you find this. Everyone found this afterwards. Hey, Jamie Neese, let's go back over your question on the 66 Pro Reverb. I answered this. I had like a 10-minute soliloquy on this, apparently just to myself. Isn't that frustrating? Yeah, I would need a little bit more information. Is it okay if it's okay on the normal channel, but only dark on the vibrato channel? Then it's not the output. It's not going to be the output of the speakers either way. It's going to be possibly a tube, possibly the bright cap going to the not the bright cap, but the treble cap, the 250 picofarad going to the treble pot. It could also be a bad treble and or bass pot. Is it on both channels? Is it just on the reverb channel? Those old ceramic disc caps are often great, but sometimes in rare instances they drift, and when they do, they tend to get smaller in value, actual value. So I would have to have the amp on my bench to know more than that. It would rarely be a tube or a speaker. Hey, Captain Grumpus. Yeah, another one I did a long answer on. I do work on my own guitars within reason. I'm going to try to give a faster version of the answer I gave before. I do basic stuff. I do intonation, truss rod, relief, action, intonation, all the electronic stuff. That's my wheelhouse. I will slightly deepen it. I'll deepen a nut slot if necessary. I'll make sure that the angle on a nut slot is good. Make sure the nuts are clean, the fretboard is conditioned and all that. I don't do frets. I don't do serious woodwork. I'm just not set up for that here, and it's been 25 plus years since I did a lot of that stuff. So if you haven't done a fret job in 25 years, you don't want to do a fret job on your own guitar. And, you know, with rosewood especially and bone dust, I just don't have all the vacuums and grinders and belt sanders and stuff that I would need to really do that kind of stuff. So I outsource the actual lutherie, but I do 90% of the work myself. Hey, Zapruder, he says, how do you figure out in which triode clipping distortion is actually occurring? Well, you can measure it. You can go in there and put your leads of your scope before and after a triode and see where the clipping is introduced. So, I mean, it'll show you. But you can also just look at the schematic and say, okay, this is where the clipping begins. Like in a Fender AB763, the first triode stage, there's almost no clipping unless you play really hard with a really high output guitar, because that signal is always at 10. And then it's turned down before the next stage. So if you get overdrive from the next stage, it's going to start a combination of the next tube and in a reverb circuit, the tube after that, the triode after that. And there's not going to be a lot in the phase inverter. You have to be really high volume before you get distortion in the phase inverter on a Fender because of the negative feedback. So in a Fender, it's almost always in the second triode. Marshall, it's always Marshall. The gain usually starts in the second, but with some of the cascaded ones, it can be different. So if you've been doing this a while, you can look at the schematic and say that's where it's going to introduce clipping, and then here's the nature of the clipping that's going to introduce. But you can measure it with a scope. You can see it on your screen. Thanks, Ridiculous Wonk. I appreciate that. Here's one. Let me make sure I'm still okay. I'm not frozen. What's your current favorite 12AX7 for both preamp and effects loop? Both best sounding versus lowest noise consistency too. I don't have a single favorite, but if I were to choose one that would probably be good for all of that, especially given the consideration that effects loop would typically be a cathode follower, I would say the Tube Amp Doctor Red Bass ECC 83, which is premium select. I don't know, but it's the red bass. So, hey, John L. Oh, jeez. Another one that I answered in the previous chat, which tells me that previous chat is just garbage. Wow. The AC15TB, yeah, I had one in. It just had a hum, and the hum was caused by mismatched EL84s. And I diagnosed that. I put in some JJs. Hum went away, and I told the owner, look, don't put any money into this amp. It's not a great sounding AC15. It's got so many little things that are wrong, keeping it from being the true Vox sound. It's not well built, but at the same time, because it's one of the last of the UK built ones, people want it. So it's worth much more than what it objectively is. So he took my advice and he sold it. And with the money he sold it for, he got an AC15 C1 X with blues. And that is here for me to do some mods on. And I'll be doing that next week. Not anything radical, just pushing it more in the direction of the JMI. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the AC15 Top Boost, the core UK stuff. Well, Alan, thank you. For most of the things that I do, back when I was playing out and knowing what I know now, if someone were to say, here's a really good super reverb, here's a really good AC15, here's a really good Vibrolux, I'd be very, very happy. If I had to negotiate smaller stages at lower volumes, I would probably, especially if I need to use a mastered volume in said situations, I'd probably go with the AC15 C1 X as an all-purpose kind of thing. If I could get away with lower stage volume, but I didn't have to have it really quiet, I love the 5E3 Tweed Deluxe with a few little tweaks that Brad knows about, just to keep the flub out. But you know, again, that's low wattage compared to a Marshall. But you know, if you had one of those kind of cranked and a clean Vox to AB between, I would be happy with that. Not that I'd necessarily keep the Vox clean all the time. Thanks, Jeff Mansfield. I appreciate that. I mean, I was answering the hell out of those questions. Those questions have never been answered so well or so thoroughly before, and I'm sorry you guys missed it. I'm making sure that I'm still moving on the other screen. Jesus, that just drives me nuts. Yeah, 68, 67 drip edge could be fine. I believe that's still the AB165. You know, when it comes to vintage Fenders, especially pre-72, as long as it has not been on fire and preferably has the original transformers and the chassis is not all rusted out or bent to hell, anything else can be addressed. I haven't had as many failures in the last 2 years as I encountered about 4 or 5 years ago. But then again, I have done fewer of them. So while they don't have my complete trust, they don't have my enmity, and I have high hopes for them. And I felt very burned by Hayseed Hamfest. Because when I opened one of those things up, it was just the cheapest crap in the world inside and just felt like it was made of spit and glue. It's a tough industry. But I hope that the CE is good because I'm about to put a bunch of them into a Macintosh. And by the way, I'm not aware of any other multi-section manufacturers these days. Hey, me, myself, and I. You can leave an amp in standby to let it warm up. Most don't actually need it. I've covered that in other videos. You never need to let it cool off before shutting off the power. Standby is just for starting up when it is necessary. Power it off. Just turn it off. Let the amp cool a little bit before you move it too much, just because things are most fragile when they're going from extreme temperature swings, from one state to the next. But you don't need to use standby and powering off. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. Yeah, there you go. You got a top hat and a little sister. You are set. Hey, that'd be another option. You were asking, Alan. That'd be a good rig. I was talking about the AC-15 and the Tweed Deluxe. That would also work really well. I was really impressed by that top hat Club Royale this past week. And every Friedman I've had in has been really good. I've not found the one that is voiced the way that I would like it. But I've only played 2 or 3 of his offerings, and he's got a whole bunch of different flavors. Thanks so much, Vanguard. Appreciate that. Question. Is a boutique amp like a Bartel inherently better, higher quality than a high-end Fender after you work your magic in it? Well, is a high-end amp like a Bartel inherently better than, say, a restored 66 Fender, 65 Fender? No, it's inherently different, and in some ways it has some superior approaches, but at that point you're looking at 2 well-designed, well-built musical amps. The thing is that Fender has not made an amp really properly since let's be generous and say 1980. I can't think of a single Fender since 1980 that's been built to the level of what even CBS was putting out, let alone, I know that the 80s stuff was still CBS before they were sold in what, 84? But, let alone comparison to what Leo and his lines were putting out before the CBS transition. It's not like CBS came in and fired all the good people and then they instantly went to shit. Weird things started to creep in a little bit in 69. And I've seen most of the amps from 72 have had datode baffled rather than screwed and baffled. Someone was saying they had one in a 71, so maybe some models changed earlier, or maybe most of them were released in 72, but they started the change in 71. I don't know. So when they went to the datode and baffle, that was one declining point. When they started heavily waxing boards, that was another declination. There are other things associated with that. These are the big tells. Datode in baffle, heavily waxed board, and then the later Velcroed on grill cloth. But even, say, a 79 Super Reverb with a datode in baffle, glued in baffle, and heavy wax on the board, and the little frame with just Velcroed on to the actual baffle that always flops and gets loose, and the metal silver plate that always flops over by the lamp end. Even that's better than, say, an 85 Fender. So you can't compare current Bartel stuff to current high-end Fender, because there are no current high-end Fenders. There are highly priced current Fenders. But as far as Fender's production, their best offerings are just the standard reissue series that a good tech goes through and makes more roadworthy. The hand-wired stuff is a bad joke. Mark Bartel's current stuff is just artwork. Whether you need that level of artistry, that's debatable. Once you get to a certain point, anything beyond that, you get diminishing returns, but beautiful, beautiful work. And nothing he does is ever just cosmetic. Hey, Jeff, if you got a Super Champ X2 and it's working, enjoy it as long as it works. Just know that once that little DSP card goes south, it will not be available from Fender again. It'll be dead. So it has the countdown has begun. It may be 5 years, maybe 5 weeks. There's no way of knowing. But if it works for you, it works for you. No problem. In what situations would I not chassis ground the output transformer secondary? Is Zapruder Pedro. I would always reference the output transformer secondary to ground, whether that's there are two things here. First of all, it needs to go with heavy gauge wire, typically using just the secondary wire itself, to the negative of the speaker. So if it's got 16, 18 gauge wires on the secondary, that goes straight to the speaker terminal. And from there, 14 to 20 gauge wire, speaker wire, from that jack to the speaker, depending on what the use. The longer the run, the thicker the wire needs to be in a combo. 18 gauge is fine. And at that point, the chassis reference, if it's not a grounded jack, can be any wire. It just needs to be referenced. So there's the negative path for the signal on the, because it's AC out on that transformer. So you have that negative have a very strong connection. But the actual reference to ground can be a very thin wire going to ground at that point, like you find in a Marshall. But if you have a switchcraft jack, but it's not isolated, then you're getting the ground at the same time. There's no situation where I would not ground the output transformer secondary. There are other grounds in amps, effects loop sends or returns. Sometimes I may not. I may do a telescope ground here or there. I typically do that on the send, but sometimes the return. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into hypotheticals, but I would always want the output transformer grounded, unless I was doing a very specific thing for use in preamp or multi-amp setups where the entire amplifier circuit could be lifted from the entire chassis. Where the chassis is still safety grounded, it has its AC ground going to the power, but nothing else in the amp is connected to that chassis unless you choose to, and that's at one point. But that's it's rarely necessary these days. My AC15C1 wire bear trap is bent from factory, pops loose while playing and rattles on. Can you just remove it? It depends on if it's the. Is this for the output tube or the preamp tube? If it's on the preamp tube, it's not necessary in those amps. Those belt and sockets are so stiff. If it's a other one, you can unbend those wires. They're not that hard to do. You can bend them where you need them to be, just two pairs of needle nose pliers. And then once you get it to be in place, do what they did at the factory. They got a little bit of heat shrink tubing over the little wire tip over the end of the tube. Just cut a section and hit it with a hairdryer, and that holds the wire retainer in place. It's not really necessary. It's not necessary at all on the preamp tubes, just on the power tubes. And even then, it's a little bit arguable. It's annoying when those things get like that. I'm sorry you're having to deal with that, Emmett Otter. Sorry you had to repeat the question. If you were on the previous chat, apparently it just stranded us all. Well, thank you, Daniel C. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Philip Fisher asked if I have a desert island amp. I've always loved that concept of a desert island amplifier because it means that I've got electricity on the desert island. I always end up giving the same answers: 5B3 Deluxe, Fiberlux Reverb, Super Reverb, AC15, maybe a 68 through 72 lead or super lead. I guess if I'm on a desert island and no one was on to hear, I might as well have 2 super leads and 2 full stacks and a lot of that mythical electricity. But, the Fiberlux is just barely edging out the Deluxe Reverb. Super Reverb edges out the Twin. I love the 5B3 Deluxe. I love a Tweed basement too, but I don't know. I don't want to be greedy on my island. How many amps do I need? Hey, Anza Johns. Wow. I'm just going to have to delete the previous live stream because apparently nothing was broadcast. I answered this question too. The Cerebella is great. Yeah, if you're looking for a clean setup, I mean, it's not neutral. It's not sterile. It has some character to it. But yeah, if you like that amp and it works for you, it's a great choice. Sounds fantastic. Build is great. Not much more expensive than the Fender reissues, but you get so much more for that. So, thank you, 378 amps. If he wants an exact sounding copy of the output transformer, what things should I consider? There are aspects of transformer design that I do not fully understand as far as how the interleaving patterns go. You can achieve, what's the best way to put this? An amplifier, a transformer designer can achieve the same result in lots of different ways. And it's all going to depend on how many winds they need and whether, the various impedance choices they have. I'm trying not to say something too incorrect. They have a lot of considerations on how to achieve a certain result within certain dimensions using a certain material. And so one amp company may choose option B, and the next amp company or transformer company may choose option A, which both do on paper what you need them to do, as far as, hey, this will have X impedance on the primary when the secondary when the Y secondary is in use. But they'll achieve it in different ways, and in some circuits, those different ways of achieving what's the same on paper will sound different. So I guess this is a long-winded and vague way of me saying I would ask someone much more knowledgeable at transformers to explain to you why a Drake and a diagonal may sound different, for instance, or a triode and a Schumacher. I've never encountered two identical sounding transformers, though. When I have had a whole bunch, they all have slight variations because they all have slight differences in the number of wires, or even just the way the wires are wound. I mean, if you look at two Strat pickups, this is a Strat pickup and a transformer are kind of the same thing if you step back and squint. And so there's always a little bit of variation in there, and that's part of what makes all this fun. Hey, I have no experience with the Vox TB18. I don't know anything about that model, so I appreciate the super chat, but I can't give you pro or con advice on that model. This is the first time I've heard of it, so I would say that most people going into Voxes might be better off with some of their tried and tested designs, but certainly avoid the AC10 C1 and the AC4. Look at the 15 and the 30 C series. Hey, New York City Geology. A function type gig, mostly classic rock, but occasional dips into blues and cleaner stuff. It's kind of dependent on the volumes you need. And how much you need to be able to change things radically on the fly. Most gigs like that, they don't want you to be loud. They want you to sound like Jimi Hendrix, but at the Carpenter's level. If 20 watts would be pretty realistic for that, or 50 watts with the master volume, that Friedman BE50 might be a great choice. It depends on your budget. The Friedman is a great choice, but it costs a lot. A super reverb reissue and a handful of pedals is a great choice, but it's loud and doesn't cost too little. AC15 will do it for some things, but not all classic rock stuff. Or, how precise do you need it to sound like? If you need to go out there and say, here's my Van Halen sound, and here's my Steppenwolf sound, and here's my Monkey sound, but these function gigs are paying an awful lot, you might be better off with a fractal rig. But I can't answer that without more information and on your end. Sorry. Yeah, I have no idea what happened, but apparently I was just talking into the void for like an hour. Kicking the Tires says, have you ever thought about doing voiceover work? Well, yeah, I got a YouTube channel and a pro microphone set up just in time for voiceover to almost be vanishing because everyone's not even hiring, damn AI things. I keep hearing creepy AI voiceover stuff in YouTube videos, from woman run over a cat, LOL, or lol. It's all this either flat inflectionless stuff or really uncanny valley things. This is a channel that does like history of Van Halen. And I was watching one of Friedman's videos, and the next video that popped up was the 1984 tour. I clicked on that, and they had an AI version of David Lee Roth's voice reading old interviews with David Lee Roth. And it was creepy because it sounded like David Lee Roth, and he was saying all these things that David Lee Roth had actually said. But he sounded lobotomized because everything was very like this. Every word was said like this, man. And David Lee Roth has never had a composed, long, thought-out answer like this in his life, man. I'm David Lee Roth. It was David Lee Roth if cocaine had never happened. And that's not what he was or is. I mean, he's larger than life. All hail to the Dave, the Diamond Dave. But when you hear the robot version of David Lee Roth, man, and it's his voice-like, man, but it's not. But yeah, there's not going to be any money in voiceover work because everyone's going to have press the Shatner button for this one. That's going to be a whole interesting series of who owns the voice, because David Lee Roth probably did not give his permission to be lobotomized in the AI form. And the guys who do this for real they have resumes and all the great jobs that still exist for actual humans. Those are going to be taken. So I don't think there's any room for me to get in there unless we have a great big uprising against AI, because it's going to get on everyone's last damn nerve. Sebastian Abieta, he says, I have an amp at the rectification stage. It starts with 2 diodes, then filter caps, and then an additional 5AR4 rectifier tube. What's the purpose of having 2 rectification stages in this case? I would have to... I would want to see that schematic, because I'm not sure that's at all what's actually happening, because if you're not going to have a rectifier tube being fed DC. So I think you might be misunderstanding what's happening. You may have 2 diodes in series before the 5AR4 and then the filter caps after the 5AR4, but you don't want to have a DC filter cap on AC, and you don't want to have a 5AR4 rectifier tube being fed DC unless there's some really strange special use purpose that I've never run into that. I'd love to see that schematic, but it doesn't sound like that's the entire picture of what's happening there. If I'm wrong, please find a way to share that with me. I'd love to know. Hey, APF, sorry. I didn't mean to miss it last time. Asked in the live stream, but here it is again. Just bought a 72 Super Reverb 4x10. One of the last good ones, by the way. 72 is one of the last really great years. I mean, the 76, they're fine, but the 72 is the last that I would consider like that's one to really seek out. Has new electrolytic cap, sounds amazing, good. Recommendations for a bias for vintage GE6L6 tubes. Are they really GE6L6 or are they GE6L6 GCs? If they're true 6L6s, no GC, I would not use them in that amp. A true 6L6 probably will not be happy with the plate and screen voltage present in a 72 Super Reverb. If they're old GE 6L6 GC tubes, which is more likely, are these huge Coke bottles or just regular tubes? In fact, kind of stubby. I would say, Don't exceed 63%, 65% idle dissipation, and don't be afraid to try like 48 to 53. But if it's a 606, not a 606 GC, I wouldn't waste those tubes in that amp. It's going to be too much voltage. All right, now here's where we're at a weird situation where you guys bailed because the previous stream spazzed out, but I was just yapping away. I think for a good 45 minutes or so, which. Yeah. But my bladder says it's been an hour since the last intermission. So we're going to try an intermission and hope that we don't mess things up and that everything will still be going when I come back in 7 minutes. Well, let's get back into it because we're making up for lost time. We're going to go to at least 4 today to make up a little bit for the problem earlier. Let me make sure that I pop up on this thing here. There's a real big delay, but I'm still moving on it. So, okay, good. Let's see here. Jeff Mansfield. No, I like I said, I guess I said screaming into the void earlier. Tonight I'm going to be playing email catch up. So if you've sent me an email, I will be replying. I'm sorry. It's been a week, and then I was sick a week and a half ago. I've been playing catch up. That's it. Rigol, and it's fancier than I am. I'm still learning some of the things it can do. Hey, Todd, you can play jazz on anything. The Freeman Little Sister play jazz? Sure, if it gets the sound you want, there you go. Yeah. I would have to play the Little Sister. I have not yet. I know how it's built, and I know Dave's ears and the ears of his consultant clients. So I would imagine it's pretty damn good, but I've not tried that model yet myself. Let's see. Yeah, well, like you said, good. And grounding the output transformer, referencing it to ground is crucial if you have negative feedback. If you don't have to. Other than it can sometimes make things a little bit quieter. Let me take that back because I'm putting too many eggs in one ill-explained basket. A better way to phrase it is, unless you have a compelling reason not to, there's no reason not to. Well, Matt Johnson, if you've not had duck confit, I suggest you find some place that does it well, because if it's done poorly, it's awful. But when it's done properly, it's one of the best things you've ever had. Just some duck confit and some pommes frites and some mustard / mayo for the fries. And I like the mustard on the duck, and it's a wonderful thing. Wash it down with a good red wine, and I'm going to go eat now. Damn it. Actually, Nikki's making Indian tonight, so fingers crossed. It's one of those packet sauce things, so I'm not entirely confident. I did a stir fry last night that came out great. Pork and broccoli and carrot and onion and a lot of red pepper flakes. It's real simple, really good. Stir fry I need to do it more often. It's good for you, and it's tasty, and you get to go, which is always fun. Hey, Boston Guitarist, thanks for joining us. I have no thoughts on the Sun relaunch. I was unaware there was a Sun relaunch. If you have a Princeton reverb and you want more mids, the Princeton in its stock cab with a 1x10 is usually fairly mid-heavy. But if you want more mids, try the 10-inch greenback. Hey, Tommy Mitchell, shoot me an email at info@sonicaudio.com, and like I said, I'm trying to get through a bunch of emails, and I get so many. And I don't mean this is not a complaint. Aside from all the obvious spam and the people trying to get me to sell you guys VPNs, I get people asking about amps that I will never work on. Can I send you my Blues Junior? No, I get enough of them. No, I'm not having someone ship a Blues Junior across the country. Not because I'm a snob, but it's not a good use of anyone's money. It's not a good investment for anyone. But beyond that, I have a lot more work suggested than I can do, and more. And I have got, for each serious one, a lot of people don't know what this costs. So if I say, hey, what's the description? Okay, that's likely to be $320 labor. It's probably going to be about 100 parts, maybe less. If it needs tubes, that could be an additional 150. And then they're not interested. But that's like on the 7th email. And so I've spent 30 minutes on something that leads to no fruition. So I'm going to be coming up with a website contact sheet as soon as I find the time to make it, which is going to give, hey, average repair on a reissue series fender is in this range. Average restoration of a 60s fender is in this range. Knowing that, if you're serious, please proceed. Because, I'm not saying that you are one, but there are an awful lot of tire kickers out there, and I have X many hours. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that there's a reason. I will go and answer emails and spend 3 hours with nothing to show for it at the end of it. It can be frustrating. So I'm trying to find a better use of my time to make it more effective ways for people who want the work done and understand what it might cost to get in touch with me. Let's see. Greg McClure, see Amps Under $1,000 video where I gave a pretty good section on what's going on inside most Mesa boogies. Short version, never buy a Mesa. Don't let your friends buy a Mesa. It's absolute garbage. Hey, Jay Stern, good to see you, man. It's been a while. Hey, Alan Harvey, I appreciate that. He asked can you recommend a reliable amp head alternative to the Deluxe Reverb for tele country playing, which is lightweight and loud enough for gigging. Loud enough for gigging is going to depend on the player and the gig and the situation, but if a Deluxe Reverb would work for you, but it is too physically large, see, it's tricky because reverb, you can get a head from Mojotone that a Deluxe Reverb real one or reissue slides into, and then you've got the head version. But if you have the reverb tank close to the transformers, like you would in most heads, you're going to have a lot of noise. There's a reason the Bandmaster, which was a head, had no reverb. And then the later Bandmaster reverbs, which did add reverb, were like this tall. You can't see it, but they were a third again or half again as tall as a standard Fender head because they wanted to have that space between the reverb tank and the transformers. And that's where a lot of the Dr. Z with reverb models fails because the reverb tank is too close to the transformers and buzzes. And you can run into that on JCM 900s as well. So if you don't need reverb, you could get an old Bandmaster, or you can get a Deluxe Reverb reissue and put it in one of the head cabs that Mojotone sells. And then you'd have trim and everything else, just no reverb. Depends on your price. And lightweight it can be tricky. Like the Fox AC15 head, be great for country. Has reverb in a quiet way because it's far below the transformers, but it is heavy as hell for a head. So, and there are probably guys out there who'd be happy in your situation with a quilter. I'm not one of them, but other people do enjoy them quite a bit. I have not worked on any current production customs crystals. Sorry, I've worked on some old ones from the 70s, but they're, unless you're Danny Partridge, you may not be happy with them. Yeah, I know Fogarty got good sounds with them, but I think he's using twins ever since. Boss Katana, Matt Fields suggests that Boss Katana would probably be good for a lot of country gigs, especially if you need lightweight. It really depends on, it's going to depend on you and what your biases are. A good player can get a great sound out of a Boss Katana, even if they would sound better or be happier with the sound and feel through something else, a katana is not going to make you suck. A tube amp is not going to magically make you a better player. I think the katana definitely has a role. And man, so many questions. I spent like 10 minutes on this question before talking to no one. Victoria amps are great overall. I have some quibbles with some of their choices where I think they copied things in the originals that could have been tweaked better. But if you have a Victoria or are interested in a certain sound and the Victoria does that, it's a great decision. Current production Marshalls, I'm unaware of any high-end current production Marshalls. I'm aware of some expensive current production Marshalls, but that doesn't correlate to the high-end. They're just expensive. I don't think I have not had some of the hand-wired limited edition heritage anniversary blah blah blahs. I've had their actually I had one. I think it was one Super Lead. It looked really pretty. Crappy transformer died like a month after the guy bought it new. I don't look to Marshall for quality. I think the last great Marshalls were made about 1988, and my preference would be about 83 and earlier. I think Marshall has a very recognizable logo, and they milk the hell out of it. Hey, Brendan K. Yeah, the Deluxe Reverb didn't go through a lot of changes through the 60s and 70s. The 79 Deluxe Reverb should be great. I'm not always a fan of some of the speakers in the later 70s, but hey, if you like it with the horseshoe, you like it. It's a good amp. No reason not to get one. But the Deluxe Reverb and the Princeton Reverb had fewer changes, I think, than any other model. I'm not sure about Champ and Vibro Champ during that period, or what years those were in production, because I see fewer of them. But yeah, 79 Deluxe Reverb, as long as the baffle's in good shape, because like I said earlier, I might have said that when I was talking to no one for that hour, whatever it was. As long as it's not one of the glued-in dadoed baffles, because if the speaker connections start to break or anything, it's a pain in the butt to replace. As long as it's physically in good shape, it's a good sounding amp. Hey, Ricardo, he asks, how can I add a choke to my Vox AC15C1 without killing my power tubes? Well, here's my advice. Don't. You won't hear any difference. You'll be spending $30 for a choke and however much labor, and it's just going to be a pain in the butt to install it in the chassis, because you'd have to pull so much out to be able to access where you put the new one in. You won't hear any real difference. It sounds good in stock form with the resistor in place of a choke, and they chose the filtering in that model because it has a resistor. And if you change the choke, you then have to change the filtering and the screen node, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more to it if you want to do it right. If you just want to have a choke because you think an amp should have a choke, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. The AC15C1, the AC30C1, they don't need chokes. They don't need rectifier tubes. There are people out there who will tell you that they can install them. They either don't know what they're doing or they're just trying to make money off you. It would be, at best, an expensive sideways move in terms of sound and performance. It is a good sounding amp in stock form. The changes that I make to them do not involve the choke or the rectification. You can make what I think are improvements to the tone stack response. You can increase the EL84 longevity. You can do a lot of little subtle nice things. You can give a little more gain to the normal channel. You can correct the gain staging of the solid state stuff so that it's true unity gain and totally transparent. That's all stuff which is arguably, both subjectively and most people's experience objectively, worth it. Chokes, rectifier tubes, people talk about that on forums. It's not necessary. Hey, Matt Scott, I saw your comments in the past day or two on various videos. Contact me, info@sonicaudio.com. Like I said earlier, I'm going to be going through a bunch of emails in the coming days. I don't know about reserving a spot. It's going to depend on how many things I have that need to go out and how many things are incoming. I don't want to get in a situation where I have someone's amp for too long. It's been a fun time since COVID with things going along, and I'm really trying to get caught up. But contact me, and we'll see what we can do. Hey, Ken Constantine, he says, thoughts on retensioning tube socket pins. I've heard people say don't bother and replace the whole socket. It's going to depend. And no one likes the "it depends" answer, but it's an actual answer. If I get, say, a 66 fender in, and everything's good, and there's no carbon scoring on the output sockets or anything, but just one of the output tubes is a little loose, I can go in there and I can retension those socket cups just a little bit, clean it all up, get them a little bit tighter, and then, tighten up the bear traps and then get it rock solid. That's one level. That's easy. Do that. If I have a preamp socket and it's all loosey-goosey, it's often faster and better for me to replace that socket, unless it's like some old Gibson with a real funky socket chassis connection that's hard to replace because that socket hasn't been made in forever. If it's a Marshall with riveted in tube sockets, I'll just drill out those rivets, put in a belt, and screw them in place. If it's an old, valuable 60s Marshall, I will do everything possible to keep the original sockets because of the value of the amp, and also because I hate trying to deal with that little crimped collar thing to retension that. But it's not always possible. The more you do this, the faster you can say that's going to be fixable, or that's going to be more trouble than it's worth, and a new one would be better. But when I retension an output tube socket, it's not one that's falling apart that I magically put back to brand new. It's one that just needs a little bit of help to get back to where it should be. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that, especially on the 70s ones, I'll be like, yeah, that thing was flimsy to begin with and just doesn't make good mechanical contact, and the pins want to vibrate every time you play a note. So I'm just going to take that out and put in something good. Let's see here. Hey, Paul Johnson, another one that I answered about 2 hours ago. But yeah, for those who don't know, I'd started a live stream, and I was talking and talking and talking, and I even at the hour mark went and did an intermission, and I came back and I talked some more, and then I saw on the thing people saying, hey, that the whole thing was just frozen. So restarted it. So a lot of these questions I've already answered, so I've got good rehearsed answers. In this case, I don't know what the Trainer standby switch factory fix is. I rarely find myself reaching for Zener diodes in repairs unless I'm trying to limit the screen voltage on, say, on an old Ampeg and keep a screen below 350 volts or something, in which case I'll do Zener tricks there. I rarely look for factory fixes on things like that. If I have an amp in, I'm like, hey, this standby implementation here was really poor. I just look at it, how would I design this? And I do it my way. And, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but I've been doing this for a while. I know what I'm doing. When possible, my preferred standby solution, if I must have standby, is to switch the AC secondaries like you find in many Marshalls. Because that switch that we use for standby is rated for very high AC voltages, but almost no DC voltage at all. So what do most amps do? They put high DC voltages on a switch rated for low DC voltage. They get away with it for the most part because it's a very low current at high DC voltages, whereas the DC rating of the switch is given for a higher current draw. But over time, those switches do develop problems. They were never designed to switch high DC. So when possible, if I do a standby, I'm switching the, I'll switch the AC secondaries before the rectification. If I cannot do that for various reasons, then I'll do it like a super reverb. So the switching is done after a filter cap. And there's some other little tricks to it. You can see a lot of approaches to that on the valvewizard.co.uk thing that Merlin Blenco has up. But I've never looked up Trainer's factory fix for that. I don't know what that is. Sorry. Now, Victor, I'm very glad to see you. I've been thinking about you this week with everything that's awful that's happening in Maui. I hope that you and all of yours are safe and all your friends are well. And my heart goes out to everyone in Maui and Hawaii in general. What an awful thing to watch from the sidelines. But Victor, you've been in my thoughts this week, and I'm glad to see you here, and I hope that you are well. John L., hey, if you've got the AC15TB and you like the sound, that's great. It's not a bad sounding amp. It just doesn't sound like a Vox. It doesn't sound like an AC15. It doesn't sound like a 15-watt version of an AC30. Yeah, like you said, the build quality is terrible. If you recapped it and you get a good sound, that's fine. And yeah, I think the good cells are the good cell never comes up on the channel. But I've had one or two in, and they're well built amps. I wouldn't put them to the level of, say, a Germino, but they're quite good. But in this case, the guy had brought me the AC15TB and wanted me to do a whole bunch of mods to it, and I said no, it's not worth putting any extra money in. New pair of JJs, I think it was $50 with shipping. Sell it to someone who desperately wants their really bad AC15 to say made in UK, and he did, and they did, and life is good for everyone, except for whoever bought the made in UK AC15TB. Hey, Justine Scarrett from Oslo, thank you very much. Do you have any recommendation of reading material for understanding, analyzing tube circuits better? He has a basic understanding of electronics. Well, this comes up a lot, and Brad and I really are going to do a video on books and resources. But like I just mentioned before, I would strongly suggest you go to the Valve Wizard, VALVE Wizard.co.uk. That's Merlin Blenco's site. He has a lot of really great information on there, including a full PDF chapter on how triodes work and just the basics of figuring out how you design a preamp. He's got stuff on rectification, he's got stuff on standbys, he's got stuff on different ways of filtering, ground schemes, all this stuff. And then he has actual full books to buy. Those would be my starting point, especially if you're new to all this. And because it starts off fairly easy and understand, and all his concepts are sound. And then he gets into math and formulas. And if at that point you find yourself still interested and want to know more, there are a lot of other good resources. For those who are very technically inclined but not experienced in this field, I would recommend the Radiotron Designer's Handbook version 4, which is available on the internet for free in PDF form. You can find that Radiotron Handbook version 4. And then there's a world of stuff in between. I'm not such a big fan of some of the Weber books, Gerald Weber stuff. I don't want to get into that here. There's some information that was written in the 80s that hasn't held up well, because recommendations on, there's no need to recap this. Well, that was written in 1980 about an amp that was only 15 years old. The 80s were 40 years ago. So a lot of information in some of those old books, including Aspen Pittman's book. I don't think all of it is aged as well. And I don't want to get into a big argument. And I would have to have chapter and verse to be able to say, this right here is what I'm talking about. Not this. This part's good. This part's what I'm talking about. But the Merlin stuff is excellent across the board. Thanks very much, 378. Appreciate that. What not to do when designing PCB tube amps? Well, tube sockets can be mounted on the board. They're not always mounted on the board well. See the Blues Junior. But especially preamp tubes, they can be mounted on the preamp board. Preamp tubes especially can be mounted to a PCB very well, but you have to make sure that all the mechanical force that's going to happen, all the stress of the mechanical of inserting and removing preamp tubes is borne by something other than that PCB. You cannot have the PCB flexing when you do that. So you've got to have a lot of other things. And when it comes to power tubes, there's heat, there's current, there's all kinds of considerations. Sometimes it's better to have power tubes chassis mounted. In fact, arguably it's always better, but sometimes if everything is done well, you can have board-mounted power tubes. Friedman does with 18s in his Runt 20. Sir did with 6v6s in his Ombre. Both of those had daughter boards, so the output sockets were not on the main board, and both of them had very heavy traces. Beyond that, what not to do, you'd have to look at a lot of my videos because I can't. If I start now, that'd be the rest of the chat, and we would just be getting into it. But if you want to see what to do, from which you can drive what not to do, look at my Blues Juniors and my Hot Rod videos. Those are great. 101, don't ever do this, and Finderki just keeps on doing it. And then look at the Sir Ombre and Friedman Runt 20 videos as examples of, hey, this is done right, and this is why this is done right. Even if not everything in there is something I 100% agree with, that's shop talk, philosophical, slight differences and preferences. That's very subjective stuff. But when I look at the Hot Rod and Blues Junior stuff, like this is why this catches on fire. They all will do this. They will all catch on fire. They are all designed to screw you and make some accountant some money. The Fenders, not the Friedmans and the Sirs. Hey, Federico. Again, I thought I'd answered your question 2 hours ago. I have not had either amp on my bench. I've not played either amp. I've heard good things about Milkman and Clark, but I have no good or bad opinion of them myself. Fully discrete signal path, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean not digital. It means that instead of an op amp, say you have a reverb, a solid-state reverb supply in an amp. Say everything else in the amp is tube, but it has a solid-state reverb driver and makeup gain stage. You can do that with 1 or 2 op amps, or you can do it discretely. And what does that mean? An op amp is actually a series of diodes and transistors and resistors all put together in a particular way so that voltage here and here, and then voltage here and here will yield a different voltage here, which can be controlled externally. So I can have this basic op amp, which is really just a set of diodes and resistors and stuff, like I talked about, which means that I know that voltage coming in here will come out at this point, and if I adjust the gain, I can say that's going to be 10 times amplification or 100 times amplification, and I can set it so that it's going to pass everything above 20 hertz or everything above 200 hertz. You know, I have control over that, but all that's in one little black box. That's the non-discrete way to do it. The discrete way to do that is every transistor that's in that op amp, which is the size of, and I could get 2 op amps on my thumbnail, is now a single transistor, a single diode, a single resistor. I have got to build that network. So what would fit 2 op amps on my thumbnail is now a section of the circuit board that you could build an entire pedal into. This is a hot cake, and I'm hoping to do a video on this because I'm hoping to have a repair on this. This is a hot cake, which is a very wonderful sounding, well thought of overdrive pedal, and the owner took the pedal that I had on his board off and put this in its place, and the pedal that I had on his board was set to 18 volts on his power supply for higher headroom. It was an RC booster, and he plugged this in, so he put 18 volts into this hotcake, and this hotcake has 16 volt capacitors, so those caps didn't hold up very well. And I'm hoping I can fix this, but the trouble is, I don't know if you can see this, Crowther used goop. There's epoxy there, so this has been gooped, so no one can see what his magic was, which I think is just ridiculous. This goop would not stop me from figuring out how this pedal was built. I could still figure that out. What this goop might do is prevent me from changing out 3 16-volt electrolytic caps and bringing this back to life. So we'll find out, but that's why you have to be very, very careful with your power supplies. And I had told the client in question, he knows this. I told him, hey, I use 18 volts on this RC booster because it'll run much less noise. The pedal will like that. But if you use anything else, make sure you flip the switch back to 9 volts. Well, he didn't, and now we have a hot cake which ain't so hot, which would have been fixed in 5 minutes if it hadn't been gooped. Rant over. Anyway, a non-discrete version of op amp takes about this much space on the board versus half a thumbnail. So I guess about a pinky nail versus a hot cake. So in stereo world, hi-fi world, people want things to be discrete because, of course they do. It's complicated, so that's better for them. And in the real world, people will talk about how much better, for every reason, discrete circuitry is over chips, and they'll type it on their iPhone and send it to a satellite that goes instantly around the world to another satellite to someone else on their laptop, and all that is done with integrated non-discrete circuits. It's the discrete thing seems to plague the audiophile community a lot, and I'm all in favor of anything that plagues the audiophile community. Thanks, Blaine Connor. Appreciate that very much. All right, you got a Magnatone Super 15. Cool. You're not going to have any problem with any pedals into that amp unless you're doing something with an awful lot of gain and you have the amp set dirty. So if you have the amp set dirty and you were to do something with either a lot of gain, like a big muff kind of thing, or a lot of boost, it can get a little bit muddy. It can get kind of mushy. So if you're using a pedal with an awful lot of gain or an awful lot of boost, you want to keep the preamp a little bit lower so that you're not kind of, a very technical term, mush out your signal. It's going to be a case of doc, it hurts when I do this. So just don't do that. But almost every pedal is going to be absolutely fine with that. If you have more gain dialed in on your Magnatone, then when you have a delay signal, you're going to want to use a lower delay level on your delay mix. Something you can try, it's easy. You got your delay pedal run into your Magnatone, set your Magnatone really clean, and then set your delay where it sounds right, where you go bop, bop, bop. Then turn the Magnatone dirty, and instead of bop, 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 you're going to get bop, 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 because you're going to be compressing everything, and so you're going to hear more delay. So just know that as you turn your gain up on your amp, you're going to want to turn the level of the delay down, and vice versa. If you really listen, and maybe even take notes to yourself while you're first getting the hang of it, about 30 minutes you're going to know exactly how to interpret this and say, oh yeah, so I've got my mix about 45% when I'm clean, and if I turn it up to like 2 o'clock on the amp, I'm going to go down to about 9 o'clock, and life will be good. But yeah, unless you're just hitting the input too hard or giving it too much low-end boost, you'll be fine. Blaine, it ain't no thing. You put that question anywhere you want. I'm going to get to it if I can. The super chats are appreciated, but they're not necessary. I do appreciate it. Hey, yeah, right. He's asking about a 65 reverb, 65 deluxe reverb amp. Can the tremolo speed be slowed down? Can the minimal tremolo speed be slowed down? He says his setting is not slow enough for him. Well, changing the tremolo tube allow for different slowest speeds or an audio taper pot. Neither of those things. You don't want to. The tube won't do it for you. The pot is not the issue. The issue is there are 3 capacitors, and let's call them 3 primary resistors in a part of the tremolo circuit called the LFO, the low frequency oscillation circuit, and that's what determines your actual speed. And I don't want you to do this yourself, and I want you to listen to this because I don't mean any offense. Based on the nature of your question, I don't think that you should go and modify your amp, especially on a reissue. It's very, very easy to damage the board on that. You should take it to a professional, both for safety reasons for you and also to protect your investment. It's a very easy thing to do, and even while he'd have to pull the board up and partially disassemble the amp to do that, to make this change. The actual change is very simple. There is a 0.02 capacitor, followed by a 0.01 capacitor, followed by a 0.01 capacitor, and they've got various resistances to ground. I'm not going to go into that now with the 3 meg and the 100K and the 1 meg and all that. But the important thing is that 0.02, 0.01, 0.01, 22 or 20 nanofarad, 10 nanofarad, 10 nanofarad. That's the important thing we're looking at here. You can either increase the second cap from 10 to 20, so you have 20, 20, 10, or you can also increase the first cap. Some people have gone as high as a 0.068, then a 20, then a 10. Your tech, your local good tech will be able to guide you on this and maybe even say, let's try this, let's try that, because you can do some alligator clips. It's changing the first and or second capacitor in that LFO network, adjust the minimum speed. Now, when you adjust the minimum speed down, at some point it gets so slow that you don't have much depth. So you've got to find the slowest spot that still works well for you. And then as you decrease the minimum, you're also decreasing the maximum. So if you started here and you end up here, well, your minimum is slower, but your maximum is also slower. There's a 100K resistor there in series with that 3 meg pot that can be decreased. So a good tech will say, all right, well, we've gotten the slowest speed here. Now we're just going to decrease that resistor and bring your faster speed up a little bit. And that will, you have to find the right compromise. But a good tech working with you can get you this fairly easily. And on the reissue series, the V5B, the V5B cathode bypass cap in the stock amp is a 22 microfarad. Have them change that to a 4.7 microfarad. Then the speed pot, as you turn it quickly, the speed will change at the same time that you turn the knob. Otherwise, you have to turn it and then wait a second before you hear it. Hey, Nola Rocks. He says, does swapping tubes really affect sound tone on amps and other electronic outboard gear? Yep, let's move on. Usually it's minor, sometimes it's major, and sometimes you won't hear any difference. It's kind of depend. Swapping tubes, if you take out good tubes, put in bad tubes, it's going to change for the worse. Vice versa. Sometimes you'll take out a Mullard and put in a tongue saw and won't hear any difference whatsoever. Dumble overdrive. All right. I'm not asking for much. Does anyone know of any Dumble overdrive type amps that are well put together? I'm going with an Amplified Nation if needed, but I find the 4K a little much. Now, I have no experience with Amplified Nation. I know Welligan, my buddy Yellow Welligan, does phenomenal Dumble homages down to new old stock stuff, but I think it start at 5K and go up. I know that Andy Fuchs Audio has some very good overdrive special inspired amps that most people would find extremely happy with, and those are certainly less than 4K, and I think they sound really good. There's a Seritone option which tends to sound good, but I've have suspicions of the longevity of the transformers, and in fact, someone on the channel said that they had one. And like I predicted, the transformer did not last that long. So you get what you pay for. There was a company I had on there where I had the steel string swinger copy where I had to change the biasing. I can't remember the name of that company. I think they were somewhere in Eastern Europe too. But I'm sure that was much more than a 4K amp. That was a huge beast. You need to keep researching, but look, if 4K is a lot for you, and I don't know anything about Amplified Nation, I mean that's up in $2 price range or more. Look at Fuchs, because it's not, you wouldn't be settling for something bad, Hey, Seth Everhart. He recently picked up a 70 Super Reverb. The owner was using a solid-state rectifier, but included a recent Genelex GZ34. Can I safely swap them for a quick evaluation of the difference? Yes, you can, typically. Unless he's got that thing biased like... Well, if the solid state's going to give you the worst. So even if the bias is off, going to the tube is only going to sound better. So yeah, that's totally safe as long as they didn't do something stupid inside. If he's using a plug-in solid-state rectifier, you should be fine. As long as no one messed up the socket wiring, you should be able to put that GZ34 in. You're going to have a lower B plus with the GZ34. The bias may not be optimal, but it'll be safe. Give it a shot. See what you think. Well, thank you, Sam Soliva, or Saliva, which is a hard one to go through school with. Hope it's not saliva. Yeah, Brad's fun to watch. He does quite good work, and he gets to say things that I can't say in America. Let's see here, getting some. Hey, Tristan. Yeah, the Twin Reverb 2 is the Rivera era. I'm not a big fan of that era, not because of Paul. Paul does good stuff, but Fender did not implement his ideas as he intended. I get the feeling that he was told that he would be able to achieve X, Y, and Z with the production, and he came up with the designs, and then the actual production was letting his designs down, and he quickly became dissatisfied as far as I can tell with the way things were really going down. That was a weird period for Fender. I don't know what the best Townhouse tube amp for the price is. I assume you just mean something that your neighbors won't mind. What is the best? What is the? I mean, it depends. Like, I would be very happy with if I were playing in a small apartment. I'd be very happy with a Swart. I'd be very happy with a Vibrochamp. I'd be very happy with a Princeton that I just didn't turn out very much. I'd also be very happy probably with a Katana or just getting some plugins on my laptop. It depends on what you need. You know, if you're doing metal, shred metal, and you don't want your neighbors to hear, you might be happiest going, and I don't know what your computer system is, but it's amazing the things you can do in the digital realm these days. But if you want it to be a tube amp, there's not a lot of apartment level metal stuff in the tube thing, but it may not be your thing. But and we're buffering again. I seem to be okay on the iPad there, though it's like 30 seconds behind the real one. That scares me after that early problems. Let's see. Jordan, there's usually a date code on dating Celestians. You got to go to various websites and find Celestian date charts, and you can usually narrow it down pretty quickly. Yeah, muting a signal without pops or snaps is pretty easy, as long as you already have a ground reference and you're just putting a resistance or lack thereof in parallel with that ground resistance. I think the best way to do it is probably with some of the new optocouplers that Claire and Ipswich and stuff have out, where it gives about a 3 millisecond time, so there's no real switching. It's a ramping. Instead of going on off, it's like moving faders on a console. But 3 milliseconds, the smallest amount of time that our brains can perceive is about 10 milliseconds. But 3 milliseconds is a really long time for electrons, so it's a nice compromise. But it's not necessary. A lot of companies just do it with a standard transistor which is fine until the transistor dies and you get a 5150 that's permanently muted. Benjamin says, that's harsh. They're incredibly reliable amps and offer many tonal possibilities. I assume he's talking about mesas. From a technician's perspective, maybe you just don't enjoy the more complicated PCB repair. Well, I'm going to take this at face value and assume that you've never seen my videos. No, mesas aren't any of that. They're not incredibly reliable. They're incredibly unreliable. They're incredibly stupidly built. It's insulting that they keep selling this garbage to people with huge strings of carbon composite resistors to get a voltage drop, traces that are way too close together on boards that have really poor conformal coating that actually becomes conductive, where you're guaranteed to get arcs, where they have diodes that are not rated for the current through them right up against the board where they burn. The solder joints always become unreliable on those diodes, which leads to arcing. Many times those diode solder pads are interrupted by plastic standoffs. Plastic standoffs have no place in a professional touring amp. Those standoffs don't hold up. The plastic gets brittle over time with exposure to heat. And what's in an amp? Heat. They have very unreliable Vactrols that almost no one else in the industry has used since the mid-'80s, but they're just really reliant on the Vactrols. They have no correlation between the schematic and reality or any reliable documentation. They layer things horribly so that in order to change the one resistor which failed, first of all, you have to be able to guess where that resistor is because there's no documentation from the factory. And I've been given stuff by the factory, and this is not some outsider just complaining, looking in. I've spoken to the guys there. I've been given secret information. They don't know where R24 is either. But when you finally do find R24, it's a plate resistor for V3. It's 8 inches away from V3, and you've got to remove 4 orange drops to get to that resistor, and those orange drops are only rated for 400 volts, but there's routinely a 450 volt drop across them. They burn up. Same thing happens in their bias supplies. They're awful amps. They are designed incompetently. They're built shoddily. They are priced outrageously. I'm not scared of a complicated board. I understand every amplifier that has ever been on my bench. They're not like a Crown Macrotech, you know. I see people say that when I criticize them. They say, "Oh, you just don't understand," or "You just want things to be finished," or "You don't understand." You know, I'm really good at this. Not being egotistical to say that at this point. This is something I'm very good at. There's nothing magical in a Mesa. There's no advanced engineering in a Mesa. There is stuff that you would fail an engineering 101 student for doing. Hey, you're taking my electronics class. You're going to have 16 volts at this point of the stage. Should you use the 15 volt tantalum capacitor or the 30 volt electrolytic capacitor? So, sorry, Benjamin, I'm not shitting on you. And a lot of people don't understand because Mesa has spent millions over the last 15, 20 years, 30 years, trying to convince us all that they just are the best stuff in the world. And if they spent half what they spent on advertising on actually hiring engineers, the art of engineering, blah, 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 it's crazy. It's a cult at this point. There are left-right-handed pots. The taper is almost always going to go the wrong way for you because most guitar pots have audio taper or linear taper. And if you're left-handed, you're going to be better off with linear than with audio. But your real best option is called reverse audio or a C taper. So if you can find a C taper, or also called reverse audio version of whatever you need, you will be happier because when you wire that backwards for left-handed use, it will behave the same way a standard audio taper pot would behave for a right-handed guitarist. Hey, Dylan Mitchell, I've not had any experience with the Tone King Imperial, just the Sky King. My jury's out on the Sky King. I'm waiting to get some information from Tone King about a possible fix for an issue a client has. So I don't want to project and say that because the Sky King has had issues, therefore the Imperial will. The only Imperials I've ever had were built back when Mark Bartel was running the show. I've not had a BAD era Imperial on the bench. Colin, that's a tricky one. He asked about Class D amps. What are my favorites if I like them? I've not tried the Victory Duchess. I've not tried the Milkman. Most Class D amps out there seem to be really cheap, really poorly done, using switch mode power supply Class D modules, the ICE modules, many of which fail repeatedly for the same reasons. Now, the good news is a new board's like $120, and it's usually pretty easy to change out. So if everything else is designed to a certain level, and say every 2-3 years you have to change out another $120 ICE module, that might be an acceptable trade-off. It is possible to do Class D better. I believe Aguilar is in some of their bass amps, but I don't get a lot of Class D stuff in, and the stuff I have had in has not been great. So maybe if I get a Milkman, I open it up, I'll say, that's great. I hope so. I have seen the insides of the Fender Tone Master, and they're just using the same ICE module everyone else is. So I don't have any high hopes for those longevity. Hey, Roncho, he asked, in my opinion, would changing the stock tubes on a new AC-15 head have much of an effect? It's going to depend on how many miles those tubes spent in transit on their way to you and how good they were to begin with. Some of them have come with tongue saws. Some of them have just come with generic Chinese tubes. But even if they're generic Chinese tubes, they may be absolutely fine. But you could have stuck really nice tubes in that and then shipped it 3,000 miles to you. You have no idea how many vibrations or times that amp has been dropped before you get it. So there's just no way of knowing. It may sound fantastic. It may need new tubes immediately. You spin the wheel and you take your chances. Hey, Jukebox Zero. I love that name. Buddha amps. No, they look cool and they got triangular shaped knobs, but they've been built really poorly in my experience. They don't sound that great. There you go. Chris is a great amp tech down in Australia. And he says, good morning, Lyle. I had a customer ask if I like a messy boogie Lone Star. I love them. I can burn them to ash without the use of an accelerant. So I'm not the only tech who feels this way, and it's not because we don't understand mesas or they're too science for us or anything. They're a scam. It's bad. It's really bad. But it's okay. They've been bought by Gibson. Good things are around the corner, right? I just asked Slingerland or Oberheim about that. Steinberger. Thanks, Martin. I appreciate that. I'm a little bit jealous with you. A bottle of real ale and a nice single malt, both at the same time. You're living large there in Scotland, Martin. Yeah, it's a shame that the first one stretched, just went off into nothingness. This one seems to be doing much better. So I look forward to going back and watching to see how much of the first one actually was anything. I may end up deleting it. Best laid plans and whatnot. And that's what's frustrating, because this one seems to be going just fine and all the settings are the same. So we've had storms coming through in Memphis the past 3 days. Must be a squirrel peed on a line somewhere. All right, we're about to wrap this up. Let me see if I can get through any big questions or any top chats. And anyone whose questions I'm not getting to, we'll have to try this again. And I'm sorry that we lost some time. And I've seen some apps, some questions repeated, even though I've answered them. So, and some of the questions I've been asked just now, I'm seeing just now, I've answered in previous streams. Okay, Victor, you're on Oahu. Yeah, I hope that everyone that you know in Maui is okay. I hope that anyone watching this with friends and family in Maui are okay. And I understand that the Hawaii.gov website, look it up, has got some places where people can make donations that are certified to get to the people who need food, water, shelter, etc. So that there's not some charity swooping in taking 30% off the top. But I don't have that website address. But Google it. You know, it's the state of Hawaii's website has got that information up. So anyone who's able to help, please do. Paulie's Guitar and Gear. What's the worst amp that costs the most money I've ever encountered? That could be interesting. Well, again, almost every Mesa has come in. It's like some of those dual and triple rectifiers are just garbage. And they were never intended to be real. And they're biased so terribly cold so they can sell you yellow tubes and green tubes and blue tubes without biasing anything. There's magic and it's simul, blah, blah, blah. It's just running the damn thing ice cold so they can put almost any match pair out there that'll work. So they can use tubes that other people can't use, because if you have your amp biased at 15% idle dissipation, you can use a tube that would burn up in a twin reverb. It's ugh. Yeah, Ted Weber is very different than Gerald Weber. Ted Weber had a much better haircut, and I think he did some really nice speaker stuff. Daniel Vargas, yeah, the 7189 is a direct replacement for an EL84. You'll be running a slightly colder because it's not going to bias as hot at the same voltage. Most people are going to not hear any difference there. It's going to last longer typically. John Williams says both 3 and 4 on Radiotron. Okay. Merlin's books are very good read too. Yeah. Merlin has that real sweet spot. You know, if you want to know a lot more, that's there. But if you just want kind of the overview, that's there as well. You can choose your own adventure there. Yeah. I'm going to try to get caught up towards the more current stuff. I'm sorry to anyone whose questions I'm not getting to this time. We'll have to try it again, and I'm sorry that we messed up. Oh, Robot Songs. I think this is the second super chat you gave me, because I answered this in the first live stream that no one apparently saw the answer to. Yeah, the Magnetone. Certain models are worth it. Certain models I think are overpriced. Like that Twilighter, had one in, and it was a fine amp, but it was just a Fender clone that had the Magnetone harmonic trim added to it. So it had the Magnetone tremolo, vibrato, whatever you want to call it, which was fine. But the rest of that circuit was just one channel out of a Fender, standard Fender deluxe, basically a deluxe reverb preamp with the Magnetone tremolo. But it costs an awful lot more, and it wasn't built that much better than a standard 65 reissue deluxe reverb. So if you like the sound of that Magnetone, the Magnetone's using a ET65 that's been relabeled from WGS. So you get a deluxe reverb reissue used for $800, get recapped. The heat stuff I've already talked about. You get an ET65 for $120. You're looking total about $1,400 for that amp. So good to go, all recapped, new speaker, deluxe reverb reissue. Go buy a $300 or less used Strymon Flint and have the harmonic trim. You're going to have 99% of the sound of the Twilighter for $1,600. So, you know, I've had Magnetones in that are pretty good. I've had Magnetones in that are okay, but not quite justifying the price. And they've had some that were good once I corrected where they just copied Vox's AC15 output section and because they kept eating output tubes, because you cannot have EL84s biased at 19 watts idle dissipation with 100 ohm screen grid resistors. I don't care what Dick Jennings did in 1959. You're not using British Mullards. You're not using old 60s Brimars. And the wall voltage is much higher these days. So once I changed those out to be sane, they were much better amps. But should anyone really need to redesign a $2,000-$3,000 amp, especially when it gets back to amp 101? It's not like Mesa levels. It's not gross negligence, but just weird when I run into little gaps like that. But, there's nothing wrong with that Twilighter. It was built inside pretty well. But, that car right over there, I'm not sure what a car, which one is that? That's the Skylark. I don't know what those go for. That's basically a really well done hand-built Princeton. Is that enough for you? That's probably less expensive than some of the Magnetones, and I think the car is better, especially when you look at the used market. Let's see. I know that I'm not going to get to all the questions, like I said, but I'm trying to. Thanks, Huge Shows. Appreciate that. Brooksburg, thank you very much. Class 5, avoid. There's just too many issues for the price point, and they're not well built. There are better choices. The Rev, I have not had experience with Revs. I look forward to seeing one. I've heard great things. I like the sounds I've heard, but I have no experience with one. SVT3 Pro. Oh, yeah, I don't work on those anymore, Huge Shows. He had a failure in Q6, which took out all 8 power MOSFETs and smoked R27. Still much too current on R27 after replacing everything. Yeah, I don't work on them anymore. I don't accept them anymore because that's all too common. When things start to fail in those, it starts a chain reaction where this is the thing that failed, but the following dozen things got stressed in that process, and the only way to fix it is almost to rebuild it from scratch, and that's a very expensive proposition, and not all the components in there are readily available these days. And SVT3 Pro was never a great sounding Ampeg, so there are times when I decline work, and the SVT3 Pro, I think it's the 3, and one of the 4s I decline now. Let's see. Anthony Carter, I have no experience with Franklin amps. Sorry. Thanks, Richard Clark. Appreciate that. My son had a Positive Grid Mini, and I tried it, and I thought it sounded like Brad can say what it sounded like. I can't. We've got standards in this country. I thought it was a bad joke. I had him send it back. I got him a Katana. And the Katana is not a great thing, but it's at least a good thing. I thought the Positive Grid sounded horrible, and the software was unreliable. Hey, Jacques Butler, thank you very much. I wouldn't describe what I dial in as crispy high-end blizzard of nails, but Voxes do have some high-end. Come back on the next live stream, maybe next Saturday, and we'll see if we can get into that so much. A lot of it's just knowing how to set up the tone stack, but it's also what guitars you use. Hey, Nick Noakes. Yeah, the non-reverb Fenders, like the Princeton and the Deluxe Reverb, have less gain than the reverb ones because the reverb ones have one extra gain stage because they're sending some of the signal to the reverb, which makes the gain drop. So then they add an additional gain stage, which both brings it up and then mixes it with the wet. They didn't get the science exactly right. It actually adds some gain as part of the sound, which is just cool. But there's nothing wrong with the non-reverb versions either. Lars John Johansson. I've answered this in a few different live streams, including the one I did on Tone Talk last November. I don't have time to redo it now, but if you really want to know, look for the Tone Talk episode I did on Dave Friedman's thing back in November. Someone asked me that. Basically, I was an English major and therefore could not afford to hire anyone to fix my music stuff, so I started. Hello again. What do you think about the warehouse guitar speakers? I think they're great. I use them all the time. Deluxe reverb reissue, ET65, G12C, one of those is going to make you very happy. But let's all be aware that all caps comes across as shouting in here. And I have the microphone, so I can shout more than anyone else. Let's just ease off on the all caps from time to time. Hey, Ben Simpson. Look at the AB165 Super Reverb circuit on the vibrato channel where it has a mid spot, but that mid spot changes from 10K audio to 100K audio, and then go to the tone stack calculator, Duncan amps tone stack calculator. Download that, call up their AB763 Fender tone stack, and then change the mid spot from a 10K audio to 100K audio and do all the sweeps. You'll see what I'm doing. But as far as the schematic, it's just that. Basically what I'm doing is saying, hey, Fender did 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock 10K. I'm doing 7 o'clock to noon. I'm sorry, they did 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock 10K. I'm doing 7 o'clock to noon 10K, and then from noon to 5 o'clock is the other 90K. So goes up an additional 90K. So it just begins to give boost, more mid-range, and then eventually defeat the tone stack on the right hand from noon to 5 o'clock. From 7 o'clock to noon is the traditional sweep of a Fender. About 10 o'clock is where stock deluxe reverb is. Oh, looks like maybe something was deleted that related to Mesa fanboys. Oh, and Brad is doing a wonderful additional information on the Mesa stuff. But other than that, Miss Lincoln, how was the play? I think that's a good time for us to all wrap this up, because we've been going. Well, I've been doing this for 3 hours and 15 minutes, but I think we ended up with 2 hours and 15 minutes of actual stuff. Thank you very much, Griffin Davies. It's very much appreciated. And we'll do this again. And hopefully the Memphis internet won't play evil games on us next time. There's so many questions I didn't get to. And to everyone whose questions I didn't get to, I do apologize. It's just too much. Oh yeah, right, about the cap shouting. I'm just making fun of it. I mean, not making fun of you. It's just one of those things. But yeah, I wasn't trying to single you out. It's just I like to be ornery sometimes. So I think this is a good time to wrap things up. What 50s or 60s Gibson amp would you recommend? Chris Bryant says. We're going to end it on this question because it's one that's near and dear to my heart. GA18T, GA40. Those are the two. They're not the only two, but those are the two to start with. Those are great ones. And that's where we're going to end this. So everyone have a wonderful week. Look for more videos from me, and be well, be safe, and particularly anyone watching this from Hawaii, you're in all our thoughts. And where's the buttons? I had all this rehearsed, and then I haven't done this in 2 weeks, and I get sloppy and forget all my buttons and stuff. Tad Morrison says, I can hardly understand a word you say. Well, I will work on my diction then. My diction and my enunciation, and we shall resume this. Maybe I'll make more progress with clarity. But yeah, say you guys. And if Brad's going to go live now, everyone go check out Brad's Guitar Garage. Extremely worth it. Extremely worth it. And thanks, everyone.